Hey guys, Lukey here, coach of your Olivine City Beacons, and this is the first match review for super low tier DPDL uh, week one. And I'm going to try giving these matches a quick review, sort of give you an insight into how I thought the match went, show off one or maybe two of my sets each week, and talk about, what I thought about the opponent's team and generally how I think it went. So let's get right into it. My first opponent was Ryan Haywood. I haven't played Ryan before. I think he was in the league last season, but we did not cross paths if we were. He has a really interesting team. His full roster included Houndoom and Toxicroak, which are the two big omissions I felt from his team this week. But I can see why they didn't come. And looking at this this match could have been a lot closer than it was. And even then, it was very close until the end. um, basically, he's got a couple of Pokemon that hit super, super hard. Caracosta being the biggest threat to my team because I don't have any Pokemon that resist both his stabs. I had Jumpluff as my only grass type, and I didn't bring it because of the rock weakness. And I don't think, especially with its physical defense being as bad as it was, that it was going to make a difference. He's got Exeggutor, which can run a number of different sets. He ended up bringing a Harvest sub Sleep Powder set, which was really, really cool. Love to see it. But he could have also brought Trick Room or Specs. And obviously, Escavalier is sort of the linchpin of the team. It blows holes through things. And I kind of had to prep with that in mind. And so I brought Oricorio in its fire type form as sort of the blanket check. And because of a misplay, it doesn't even get to see Escavalier in battle. Well, a misplay, I should say, it was a very good prediction by my opponent. Heading in, I thought, Primeape is going to be the key here because Primeape can hit everything either hard or for super effective damage. I brought Ice Punch and Fire Punch to cover Altaria and Escavalier. And I also brought Boltund with Fire Fang for Escavalier. So I had a lot of the big threats fairly well covered. And just want to do my set of the week for this match. It's Lanoon Galar, who I named Gene Simmons. I don't know if he was my MVP this week, but really, really cool mon that I drafted mostly because of its type profile and its supporting move pool. But it's really surprised me with how versatile it could be. And this week I brought Quick Feet and Toxic Orb, which means I can run an Adamant set, lets it hit fairly hard naturally. It's got great speed, and looking at Ryan's team, the highest speed tier on his team, at least that he brought, was Pikachu at 95, and I think Pikachu is the fastest Pokemon on his team overall. I think Houndoom might also be 95, but not higher than that. The big mistake I made heading into the match was underestimating Krokorok, but we're going to get into that. So I start by leading Sandslash, thinking I'll try and get rocks up. He brings in Caracosta, which is immediately scary because I think, if this guy shell smashes, I'm already in a lot of trouble. And notwithstanding that, I believe even after +2, Scarf Primeape and a toxic boosted Lanoon Galar can both outspeed, I realize I'm in a lot of trouble here. And looking at the rest of his team, I'm not convinced that Sandslash really does a lot of work. So I basically decided to go with a safe play and go for Earthquake to try and get chip damage on it. As he goes for the Waterfall, it does a ton of damage. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, all right. So he tries to take out Sandslash. I go into Lantern, who is going to be, the underrated linchpin of my team every single week. It takes that Aqua Jet like an absolute beast, and it brings in Pikachu, which is great because Pikachu has no real way to Dent Lantern, or so I thought. Turns out Ryan ran a sub punch extreme speed knockoff physical Pikachu, which is so much fun, and it's a shame that it didn't get to shine in this match. And as I scald, which could have been disaster for the Pikachu right there, he goes to the knockoff, knocks off my Assault Vest, which isn't a huge deal. Lantern's not tied to that item. And then in comes Krokorok, and this is sort of the decisive turn of the game. One, because I underestimated Krokorok, but here he shows me that he's Intimidate rather than Moxie. And Omerta in the chat afterwards mentioned that Krokorok with Scarf and Moxie sweeps my team at the end, and he might be right. That said, as you'll see in a few turns, I would not have sacked Primeape. Because if this thing had shown Moxie, I know immediately that it would be Scarf, or if it had have shown Moxie and no Intimidate, I would have known immediately it's Scarf. I have to preserve Primeape at all cost. So here I make a really just a dumb play. I predict the Earthquake, but he predicts that. It's an obvious switch. And so I go into Oricorio, and he goes for Rock Slide, which just absolutely decimates Salsa. And all of a sudden, you know, this match is really on because my blanket check to Escavalier is out of the game, and I'm relying on second tier coverage moves, which is not ideal. So at this point, the strategy then becomes, you know, I've got to chip down Escavalier somehow, and then try and take it out. Because otherwise, if it gets in on full health, and I have to try and revenge with Primeape or Boltund, I'm in a lot of trouble. So I bring in Primeape on the revenge to try and do some damage. But I also kind of wanted to see what he was going to do, so I just U-turn Scout, bring in Lantern, which has Ice Beam coverage for this thing. Lantern can take anything this thing wants to throw at it. I don't think it's quite enough to take out Altaria. I'm surprised he didn't switch out there because he outspeeds. He could have roosted and outlasted me for a while. I'm not really sure what he wanted to do there. But he goes into Caracosta, and I make the really nice predict and get off the slow Volt Switch, which lets me bring in Boltund. And at this point, he's in a lot of trouble because he's got to predict right or something is going to die. So he goes actually for Aqua Jet, and I go for Volt Switch. So had he predicted right and gone into Krokorok, he would have negated this move. But instead, not only do I get the KO, I get the Volt Switch off, and I get to bring in whatever I want for free. And this is sort of a turning point in the match, because he brings in Krokorok, and all of a sudden he triggers Defiant, and Primeape is a huge threat. And that earlier chip damage, you can see Ryan's reaction here, that earlier chip damage really adds up on Altaria, because now it's within range for close combat. So I basically just take it out with the 2 close combats. There's really not much he can do. It just straight up dies. But Primeape's also in a situation where it's locked into close combat. It's going to die to whatever hits it next. And he brings in a Escavalier. So at this point I'm thinking, you know, I can chip it down. Primeape is the most useful mon on my team, but I don't want something else dying. In hindsight, I should have sacked Sandslash and then brought Boltund or Primeape back in. But at this point, I'm like, you know what? I've got the Defiant boost. Close combat will take Escavalier into KO range for anything that I bring in next. And so I go to Boltund to keep the pressure up. And Firefang takes it out. And turns out that was an extra great play getting it chipped down because of the Okaberry. So in comes Krokorok, obviously a huge problem for me at this point. I go to Lanoon Galar. It eats the Earthquake, but not well. And now I've got Toxic Orb and Quick Feet up. So it's now the fastest Pokemon in play. I go for the Parting Shot thinking, you know, I'm going to sack Sandslash to be able to bring Boltund back in and try and take out Exeggutor. and thinking this Exeggutor had attacking moves. Actually, that's not what I did at all. Sandslash, I had speed crept so that it always outsped Exeggutor, and I gave it Leech Life to try and come in and do some damage. I was still expecting this thing to be an attacking Exeggutor at this point, and I wouldn't have any information to the contrary because Sandslash always outspeeds. So Leech Life got it down to Citrus range. It sets up a sub. Harvest doesn't trigger this turn, but he gets Sleep Powder off. So even though I've got full HP Sandslash back, I'm in a lot of trouble. Nothing really wants to eat a Leech Seed, and nothing else can really do a lot. But here I think he makes a bit of a mistake by not setting up sub and trying to trigger Harvest again. And so even though Gene Simmons comes in and takes this Leech Seed and now Toxic damage, and it doesn't love that, it's also in a position to take out Exeggutor, and it does with the knockoff. So that was a really nice play. And now all I've got left is Krokorok. And again, if this thing was Scarf Moxie, this end game looks very, very different. Although in this case, I think a combination of whatever Lanoon Galar was going to do, well, again, I would say, well, I guess at this point it would sweep, but if it's able to get past 271, so that's 400, yeah, it does outspeed. But again, I would have kept, or I like to think I would have kept Primeape around for this situation. So anyway, he gets Rocks up. I bring in Boltund. Even with the Fairy Resist Berry, it goes down, and that's the match. So good start to the season. Definitely some misplays on my part. Poor Oricorio didn't get a chance to do anything. It's going to be a recurring theme on this team with so many flying types that don't like rock coverage. And that don't like ice coverage either, especially Jump Luff. So I'm going to have to be aware of that, and it's going to cause Lantern to do a lot of work. But it was a good demonstration of, Boltund being an absolute unit, and Primeape really, really being a threat for softening up teams, and also just the pivoting potential here. 4 of my Pokemon got pivoting moves off in this game. And some of them were really critical to the outcome. So anyway, that's it for week 1. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. I'm up against James Vivid, a rematch from last year where he completely dispatched me in just a great display of team building and prep. So I'm very excited to take on James, and we'll see you then.